Blog Talk Radio.
This is the Girl George and the Dragons Radio Show coming to you from sunny Berkeley, California on this summer solstice. Is that how you say summer solstice? And it's also Father's Day. So being it's such a special day, we're going to do a show about a very special person. And we're going to talk about Shel Silverstein. Now, this was a man that wrote and did everything. And we're going to talk to his best friend, Ron Haffkine, all about him. Hi, Ronnie. How are you doing?
Hey, George. How are you, sweetheart?
Oh, I'm fine. Where are you at? Where are you at?
I'm in Nashville.
Nashville, Tennessee. My goodness.
Yes.
When we met,
yeah.
I was in Nashville, and you were in the Bay Area. Now it's the other way around.
Yeah, it is. Nashville, I don't know.
We met through Shel Silverstein, right?
Right. Exactly right.
Yeah, he found us in Nashville and sent us back to you in San Francisco.
What?
He found us in Nashville and sent us back to you in San Francisco.
That's right.
And then you put us out on the road with Dr. Hooko. That was real cool.
Yes, I did. That was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a long time. It was 1973.
Yeah, we had a good time out there with you guys. It was terrific.
Oh, I loved it. It was a dream come true, playing in front of all these millions of people, these big concerts. We were playing with Chuck Berry and Stevie Wonder. I loved it. Favorite time of my whole life. Okay, let's talk about Shel. Now, how did you ever meet Shel, and what year was this? How old were you, and where, and all that stuff?
Okay, this goes back to 1960, and the way I met Shel was interesting. I had been living in Mexico, and I had come back to New York, and Shel had a place in Greenwich Village. My early 20s. But anyway, so what happened was I didn't know anybody in the village, and I was sort of low man on the totem pole. I was wandering around trying to find a place to land and knew no one and couldn't do very much except play a little bit of guitar, not very well. Well, what happened was I met this guy, a fellow by the name of Bill, and what I did have was I had a car, a beat-up old Chevy. And I was one of the few people that was hanging out in the village that had a car. So Bill says to me one day, he said, why don't we take your car and we'll go up to Provincetown for the weekend? He said, I got two girls. We'll get there. We'll go up and hang out in Provincetown for the weekend. And me being a low man on totem pole, I couldn't say no. So I said, okay, fine. So it's a Friday night, and we were getting ready to leave, and we're going out 7th Avenue. And Bill says, two girls are with us, and Bill says, there's Shel. Shel was walking down the street. And he said, let's see if he wants to. Now, the last thing in the world I wanted was Shel Silverstein in that car with two girls and Bill and me, because I figured that would knock me out of the picture immediately. So I didn't want him to go. But I had to pull up, to say hello, because Bill said, hey, let's go check Shel out, right? So I pulled up to the curb, and Bill says, hey, Shel, how you doing? And girls, they knew Shel, and hey, how you doing? And Bill introduces me. And he says to Shel, he says, hey, Shel, we're going up to Provincetown. Why don't you come with us? Now, the last thing in the world I wanted was Shel Silverstein, who was already a big-time guy, in that car and on that weekend with two girls, Bill and myself. So Shel, the way he can get sometimes, or was able to get, he'd get off the train and he'd say, nah, I don't want to go. So Bill said, yeah, well, come on, man, it's going to be great. We'll have a great time. And Shel said, nah, I don't want to go. Right? I then figured I'll put the closer on the whole thing and make sure he doesn't go. So I said, well, all we're going to do is we're going to go on up there, just lie on the beach for a couple of days, be real quiet, and that'll be that. Figuring he's going to say no, and that'll be the end of that. He says, that sounds good. I want to go, take me home, right? So he hops in the car, take him to his apartment. He goes up the stairs. He lived in a walk-up, the first floor, goes up the stairs, comes down 2 minutes later with a bathing suit in one hand and a box of Ritz crackers in the other. I immediately loved this guy, right? But he jumps in the car, gets in the back seat with both girls, and I don't have to tell you the rest of that story. But anyway, but for some reason, we connected, and there was a connection that he seemed to feel, and I felt, as we spent this weekend talking and so on and so forth. And for whatever reason, he befriended me, and that changed my life. That encounter, just by accident, changed my life completely. If that had not happened, I probably today would be living in a cardboard box underneath a bridge somewhere. But the fact that Shel befriended me, and that started our relationship, which went on for more than 50 years. Now, George, this is a half-hour show, and to talk about a guy like Silverstein, one of the most amazing people, if not the most amazing person I've ever met in my entire life, to jam that into a half hour is very, very difficult. But,
so how did you start working together? What was your first project? How did that happen?
Well, okay. We were friends for, a number of years, and I was hanging out a little bit in the music business. I had some friends at Mercury Records back in those days, and I was trying to learn how to really produce records. And I had a friend by the name of Joel Diamond, and Joel worked at Mercury, MRC Music, who is what it was, the publishing company, and he let me use the studio. They had a small studio, and Shel, of course, was writing songs. So I would take Shel to that little studio, and we would do demos together, just Shel on a guitar and me. And we would just, do his songs and have a real good time. And that's how it sort of started. Now, what happened, of course, was that many years later, about 9 years later, is when that whole Dr. Hook thing happened. And that happened because of the movie with Dustin Hoffman, who was Harry Kellerman, and why is he saying those terrible things about me? And that's what got me really started with Dr. Hook. I found them in a bar in New Jersey, and that was the beginning of that whole scene and that whole trip.
So that was connected with Shel, too, that movie?
Oh, well, sure. Shel's friend Herb Garden had written the movie, and Shel had written songs that went into the movie, and Dustin was playing a producer, songwriter in the film. It was his fourth film. It was the film right after Little Big Man. And it was an interesting thing because Shel and I were walking down Hudson Street one day, and one evening, actually, we were going out to eat. And he said to me that he was going to California, and would I produce the soundtrack to that movie, which wasn't really hard because it was just a few songs and so on. The first thing I said, because I was broke, was, hey, Shel, what are they going to pay me? And he said, looked at me and said, probably nothing. And I said, what do you mean nothing? I'm broke. And Shel, without missing a beat, said, then forget it. Let's go eat. And in 2 seconds, I thought to myself, I said, am I out of my mind? He's talking about Dustin Hoffman, and I'm worried about whether they're going to pay me. So I said, Shel, never mind, I'll do it. I don't care. They don't have to pay me. And that's how that all began. And so I did that film, and I found Dr. Hook and used him in the movie, and that's how.
So you produced the songs, or you found Dr. Hook first singing, and you got them to sing those songs? Is that what it was?
No. I found Dr. Hook afterwards. Actually, the producers of the movie and the director and everybody wanted me to use a known act, a big act, because like in The Graduate, you saw him in a Garfunkel and so on, so they wanted me to use a big act. But I had heard Dr. Hook. A friend of mine had a tape of these guys in New Jersey, and I had heard them, and I wanted to use them. And what happened there was everybody said no, involved with the movie. Everyone said no. And I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I will rehearse these guys on the title song, which is called Last Morning. I said, I'll dig up the money to do a demo, but only if Dustin and Herb and Marlo Thomas, who's Herb's girlfriend, and the director, who Grossbart and Shel, said only if everybody is at that session, because I had met Hook and I knew that they were very charming and funny and so on, and they said, okay, if you want to do that, we'll go ahead. So I did it, and I spent my money and cut the record. Dustin was there, Shel was there, everybody was there. They loved the group, and they let me use them in the movie, and that's how that started. And before the movie came out, I went to Clive Davis at Columbia, and it was a cold call. I didn't know him, but of course everybody knew Dustin was making a new movie, and I called Clive and said that I have a group that is in this film, and I'd like to audition them for you. And he did, and then he signed them, and that's how that all started.
Well, didn't somebody dance on the table when you went in there or something?
Yes. What happened was I told the guys, I said, well, I knew that Dennis and Ray together were magic. When they would start singing, they were unbelievable. So when we did the audition, I had told them, I said, I'll tell you what. I said, when we go in there, I said, you two guys start singing. When the audition starts in Clive's office, I said, you guys start singing. Do not 2 feet away from Clive. Sing right in his face. I told Billy, I said to Billy, I said, who's the keyboard guy, and did this wild dance. I said, and you jump up on his desk, knock everything over, whatever's in the way, and you do that dance. And I told Jay, who was the drummer at the time, I said, if you can find a wastebasket, turn it over and start banging on it. And that's what they did. And when it was over, Clive called in his head of business affairs, who was Elliot Goldman, who eventually became president of RCA. He called him in and he said, Elliot, you take Ronnie in an office and you make a deal and don't come out till you guys have a deal. And that was on a Friday night. And we made the deal, and the group was on Columbia.
So the first song they did was Sylvia's Mother, which was Shel Silverstein's, right?
The first song was Last Morning, which was the
from the
title
movie.
song from the movie. That's right, and that was Clive didn't want to necessarily do that because it was a down song. It was not really. It was more for a movie than for a record. But Sylvia's Mother was the first major hit. I mean, that was the first record that really came out, and that was an amazing thing. It was an interesting story about that because I don't know if it can happen nowadays, but the record laid out there for about 4 months, and nothing was happening with it. And then all of a sudden, the radio station in Bismarck, North Dakota, a program director, loved that record, and he started to play it. And the record went to number 1 in Bismarck, North Dakota. I was in Clive's office. He called a conference call with all his field promotion men. And I was in his office when he did it. And they were all on the phones all over the country. And Clive said to them, he said, Sylvia's Mother is number 1 in Bismarck, North Dakota. They are not speaking Chinese in Bismarck, North Dakota. Anyone who doesn't bring the record home in his territory can look for another job. And sure enough, the record exploded. The first place it happened, besides that, was in Houston, and that's where it started. And
so that's why we played Bismarck, North Dakota. When we were touring with Dr. Hook, we played there.
That's right. That started it all. This one program director loved that record and started to play it, and he played it a lot. And back in those days, once something started to happen at all the radio stations across the country, and they started going on it one after the other, and it was a big, big hit. And
well, how did Shel go about writing that song and giving it to you? How did that come about?
That was funny. Shel had written the song. I had not heard it. I had recorded 20 songs for the first Dr. Hook album. We had moved out to California, and we were in San Francisco. We were living in a flop house on Erie Street. The rooms, yeah, that is true. We had gotten a small advance from Columbia. We had already gone through it, right? And we were living in this flop house. And the rooms for the band were $2 a night. I had a room for $4 a night because I was the producer. So I had this room because I was listening. I had a little tape recorder, and I was listening as we kept recording at the Columbia Studios, and I had to be by myself so I could listen to all these things. And I had recorded 20 songs, and I thought we were done. And we were Shel and I were coming across the Golden Gate Bridge, and he said, I wrote this song, and he played me Sylvia's Mother as I was driving across the bridge. And he said, you should record it. And I said, Shel, it's great, but I can't. I said, Clive is driving me crazy. He wants this album. And Shel said, I'm telling you. He said, man, this is going to be a hit record. You should record it. So I thought about it for a while, and I figured, well, maybe if I start recording it and Clive wants to stop me, it would take 3 days to get out here anyway. So I could probably record this thing in about 2 days, so I'm going to do it. And I did, and we recorded the record. And, of course, if that had not happened, there might not be a Dr. Hook. And that's the way that got recorded. And,
okay, how about the Unicorn song? Did you have anything to do with that? Were you around when that was done?
No. That was the Irish Rovers. I had nothing to do with that. It was, I think that might have been.
But Shel wrote it, right?
Shel wrote it, yeah. Yeah, great song.
Because I remember that when I was playing in the folk clubs, and I found out years later that he had written it. Same with A Boy Named Sue. He wrote that one too, right?
Now, that's a great 3 years. I think it was about 3 years before he ever played that song for Johnny Cash, right? We're in New York, and I get a call at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's Shel. And he said, you got to come over here. I said, Shel, what the hell's wrong with you? It's 4 o'clock in the morning. What do you mean come over? He said, I wrote this song. You got to hear it. I said, Shel, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll hear it tomorrow. We'll go to breakfast or something. He said, no, you got to hear it now. And Shel could be very demanding. So I threw my clothes on, and I went over to his apartment, and he played me Boy Named Sue. And he said, what do you think? And this tells you what a real artist is all about. He plays me Boy Named Sue. He said, what do you think? I said, it's fantastic, but what are you going to do with it? And he said, I don't know. What's the difference? And if that doesn't tell you what a real artist truly is about, I don't know what will. Now, a number of years later, of course, he played it for John, and John had it, and he was going to go, do his Folsom Prison album, right? And he wasn't going to do Boy Named Sue. And June had told him to do that particular song. And John said, well, I don't really know it. And June said, well, just take the lyrics and read them, and you know the melody, basically, and but do it. And sure enough, he did. They put it out. It was Johnny Cash's biggest hit he ever had.
What about his writing of children's books? Were you around when he did that Giving Tree? Everyone knows that story.
Absolutely. He had finished the Giving Tree, and the way that happened was there's a little bit that goes into that. He had written the Giving Tree. A comedian by the name of Sam Levinson, and Sam Levinson was doing the Tonight Show, and he read the Giving Tree on the Tonight Show. It only takes about 6 minutes to read it, 7 minutes, and the next day it exploded. Now Shel and I out to dinner the night before, or a couple of nights before, and tell you something, man. That thing is unbelievable. And, of course, after Sam Levinson read it, the next day the book just exploded. And, of course, it was became one of the show's most famous books. And I told him after that, I said, you see that? I was right about that. He said, yeah, you were. I said, I'm glad you were. I said, it's a magnificent piece of work. And
so how about Cover of the Rolling Stones? How did he go about writing that one?
How he wrote it, I don't know. But we were in St. Louis, and the group, and myself.
Yeah.
And Shel called me because he always had our itinerary and had my telephone number. Back then there were no cell phones.
So you were traveling with the band at first, right?
That's correct, right?
Okay.
And Shel called me. I was in the room. It was after the show. It was late at night. And he said, I wrote the song. I want you to hear it. I'll send it to you over the phone. And I said, Shel, Shel, how about tomorrow morning? It's late. I'm tired. I've been on the road for a long time. And he said, no, I got to play it for you now. I said, please, give me a break. He said, do you want to see your group on the cover of Rolling Stone? I said, play me the song. He played it. I wrote it down in an address book that I had. I still have it somewhere. And I wrote the lyric down. And of course, that was cover of Rolling Stone. And Clive and I fought about that record for a long time. He didn't necessarily want to put it out because of some of the lyrics back in those days, cocaine Katie, and we take all kinds of pills to kiss all kinds of thrills. So Clive was a little worried about it, and he said, I'll never be able to get the ABC chain, which was ABC in New York, NLS in Chicago, and KRLA, I believe, in Los Angeles. He said, they'll never play it. And I said, that doesn't really matter. I said, Clive, if I do another Sylvia's Mother with the band, I said, that band's going to be over with really quick. We need to get, back in those days, adult-oriented radio. And so finally Clive said, I'll go with you on it. And he put it out. And, of course, it became probably the most important record. Not the biggest selling record they ever had, but probably the most important. And that one Ray Sawyer sang. It was a huge, huge hit. And,
what about Freaking at the Freakers Ball? Talking about a freak song. I love that song.
Well, that was a lot of fun. Well, you remember back in the day, they had a Freakers Ball in San Francisco.
Yeah,
remember Margaret St. James? And
I love that song. I play it in my radio on the way to the club. Every time I go out, I put that on the CD and I play Freaking at the Freakers Ball over and over and over again. Go ahead, tell me a story.
Oh, it was a great song. I mean, it was so clever and so much fun. We had a great in England. We used to open the show with that. When the band would open the show with that song, everybody would laugh, and so of course you had the audience in the palm of your hand. Because once the audience laughs with you and is having a good time, it's very hard to lose them after that. You know?
First get their attention, right?
That's right, and it was so much fun, and the band had so much fun with it, and the audience had so much fun with it. But Freaking at the Freakers Ball was like in every show as well, and that would make the crowd go nuts too. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, I don't have to tell you, George, you were out there with us, so. You knew what it was like. It was great.
No, I loved it. They were so funny. Well, they introduced us as if we were guys. Now, I wore a sword and velvet and high boots, and Star was half naked, but she was like 6'8" with 4-inch heels, so that made her over 6 foot, and she looked like a drag queen because she was way over being filmed. So he would go out there and he would say, I ran into a couple of friends at a party last night, a couple of Army buddies, and they wanted to jam with us. So here they are. George and the Arizona Star would come out there. So they didn't know if we were girls or boys or what we were. And Star was peeling a banana and eating it and throwing it into the audience. And at the end, I'd take my sword off and throw it across the stage, and one of the roadies would catch it, and then I'd do a flip. And when we were singing, the drummer would get off his drums and be playing on the floor. I mean, it was completely a circus.
You're right. Hey, George, the reason we were all so nice to you is we were afraid you were going to kill us with your sword.
Well, I had a gun at that time, too, a real gun.
I didn't know that.
Don't you remember I had a gun on my hip underneath the costume? I think
really?
I dropped it into the studio once.
Good God, I didn't see it, and I'm glad I'm in Nashville and you're in Berkeley.
You didn't know I had a gun.
I didn't know
he's been into weapons.
That's funny. That really
Nobody fucks with me.
Yeah, well, I would say not. Well,
so, you got any more cool stories about Shel Silverstein that we haven't hit on?
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot, but like I say, it's hard to jam everything in. I mean, it's.
Well, we'll do more shows. We'll do a series of shows. So think of one of the funniest stories you have.
Well, it's hard to think of too many, off the bat, just funny stories. I mean, a lot of great things I learned from him. Because he was so aware, I once asked him, my mother was driving me crazy because I hadn't called her for a month or something like that. So I said to Shel, we were talking about it, I said, hey, Shel, because I figured he would support me, right? Because he was this beatnik, Shel Silverstein. So I said to him once, I said, hey, Shel, how often do you call your mother? And he said, every Sunday. I said, you call your mother every Sunday? I figured here's the arch beatnik in the world, and he's telling me he calls his mother every Sunday. And he looked at me, he said, don't you get it? I said, get what? He said, if I call my mother every Sunday, I only have to talk to her for a minute, because all she wants to know is that I'm alive. He said, if I miss 1 week, I got to spend an hour talking to her, explaining why I didn't call her the week before. I said, well, that really makes sense, and so I started calling my mother every Sunday. So another thing that's not funny, but it's really serious, you learn from him. Roy Scheider, who was a star of Jaws, Shel and I were walking on Fifth Avenue one day, and Scheider was coming in the other direction, and he had this young fellow with him, right? So as we came towards each other, Shel said, hey, Roy, how you doing? And Roy, hey, Shel. And they start talking. But then Shel started talking to this young fellow. And he spent a lot of time talking to him. And then after a while, everybody said goodbye, and we continued walking. And I said to Shel, I said, that was interesting, man. I said, you spent a lot of time talking to that young fellow and not so much time talking to Roy. And Shel said to me, he said, Roy Scheider doesn't need the attention. Everybody knows who he is. He's a big movie star. He said, always pay attention to the person that needs the attention, that the person that people don't know. And it was an interesting lesson in how he saw things and behavior. And it was a very interesting thing to have learned from him, and amongst many, many other things over the years,
Well, Shel, when he seen us at the Red Dog Saloon, Vince Matthews brought him in to see us.
Right.
And he was pissed off at me when I first met him because I didn't know who he was. So anyway, when he seen us play, then he understood. He drug me aside afterwards, and he says, I apologize for everything I ever thought of you. He says, I haven't been so impressed by an act since I seen Elvis the first time. He says, you shouldn't be with Pete Drake. He's too country for you. You should be with my producer, Ron Haffkine, because he does Dr. Hook's Medicine Show, and they're freaks, and you're freaks. So this should work good. So he called you up and told you should get these girls because they're crazy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. There's another interesting thing about Shel. When I first met him, he had this funny-looking hair. It was like came out of the sides of his head, sticking out, and so on. And one day he says to me, we were down in Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village, and he says, I've got old hair. I said, you're right. Now, this was back in the days when people weren't shaving their heads, right? He said, I don't know what to do about it. I said, well, why don't you just get rid of it, shave it? He said, that's a great idea. Let's go over to your place. I'm going to shave my head. Huh?
We're going to have to do another show because we are out of time.
Really?
So we are going to do another show on the same subject. We're going to do it until we get it all done. So
I'll tell you how.
Thank you for being on the show, Ronnie.
Okay.
This is Girl George and the Dragons Radio Show, to be continued in another show. Thank you for coming. And see you later, alligator.